Hi there, welcome to the video. Today we're looking at how to help someone and also understand an individual that may be a survivor of bad past experiences, maybe a survivor of trauma and other struggles. How to help understand what they're going through, more importantly, what they don't want, what they don't wish for in general in life, and even more so within a new relationship. Now, previously, I did do a video highlighting the secret needs, wants, and desires which a survivor may feel deep down inside, but may not be able to express it or get the words out. They feel it within, but they just can't elaborate or share openly with the other half, possibly maybe because of self-defense, trauma response, protecting one's self because it's too soon to explain and lay everything on the table. Well, whilst it's important that highlighting what a survivor wants and needs within and for a relationship for things to be more stable and healthy and enable a form of natural passive healing, it's also crucial to understand what they don't want, what they may dread and possibly fear. Once again, it might be feelings, emotions within which they simply can't express in the moment. And possibly they may even feel like they're not able or deserving of being able to open up and share their preferences. And that could be rooted back to the past on how they were treated and seen, what they were allowed to do and what they weren't. And then that became conditioned and it carried on from over time. Of course, this video is focusing in on trauma survivor, PTSD, complex PTSD, even by its own right, OCD, and any other possible issues where there's struggles. An individual basically doesn't want to relive the past, whatever encounter or experience with someone that may be. If it's negative, they don't want to relive that. They don't want to re-experience. They don't want a reminder. They don't want flashbacks. They don't want another outcome like that because it hurt them back then and they feel that they want better, they deserve better. But even that in its own right, they may not be able to say from the rooftop and shout, but deep down they've got a longing feeling for being able to have more, experience more. If you're interested in that type of video, the wants and the needs which remain secret and hidden within them, that video is available in my psychology playlist along with some other crucial videos which I've done recently. If you've missed out on any of those videos, don't worry, the full playlist is available. Top right corner where the eye symbol is up there. If you click on the eye symbol, you'll get the psychology playlist and it's all in one place. With that being said, focusing in on the importance of what they don't want in a relationship, what they may consider and fear that, could happen. The reason why it's important to understand what they don't want from the point of view of the other half that, is maybe with someone or knows of someone that's going through a really tough time or has a struggling past and it continues on. It's important because it completes that picture. It's okay acknowledging the positives and what they may want from that, but it's also acknowledging the negatives, because if the negatives are acknowledged, there's higher chances of being able to avoid it, as in triggers. Things that they don't want or don't like the idea of or don't wish for in a relationship, part of them could be triggers. So if the other half can pick up on that to some extent and sense it, then they can make, conscious efforts to avoid or work around it for the sake of themselves and for the benefit and health of the survivor, the one with the symptoms. Completing that full picture allows a deeper understanding with the other individual, and in such a way where maybe non-verbal communication is applied, or at least in figuring it out to begin with. There doesn't need to be verbal communication. It kind of bypasses the wall, the barrier. The one that may be struggling, they know what they want and what they don't want deep down inside, but it just may not be possible to get that across to the other half. If the other half can work it out themselves or consider through what they may have been told, what they've heard at one point, remembering that, taking it on board, social cues, body language, behavior, just those little considerations and the different possibilities or things that they say, what they like and what they don't like, and then applying that to other examples. These little touches can go a long way, because if you can communicate to them with their needs and what they don't want, and you can reach a middle ground in such a way without direct communication and without confrontation, they feel heard, they feel seen, they may feel appreciated, and that level of effort and care that one has gone to make the other person feel more comfortable. It can strengthen the bond and the connection, and it can build a level of safety and security. So it does bring about the positive foundations whilst acknowledging the negatives and, being considerate, but also cautious and open-minded to the negatives, avoiding possible triggers, working around certain forms of communication, actions and activities. That in itself can lead to a form of healing, as in showing a level of care and respect, something that they would probably wish and hope for. So combining it all together, you get both sides of the story. And when you got both sides of the story, there's a deeper understanding. It can make things a little bit easier down the line and more stress-free to some extent. So what I'm going to do is I've got like a list of the don'ts and the things that they don't want or may not wish for the other half to do in how they react or respond. I've got it listed as in trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD. That's one category of the don'ts. Then the other category can be OCD, because of the intrusive thoughts and the feelings there, what they don't want, what they wouldn't wish for in a relationship. And then even survivor's guilt, because that can tie on with trauma, tie in line with PTSD, and even more so complex PTSD. I think complex PTSD doesn't get talked about as much. Post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of people can go through that, of course, and it can be really felt, the struggles. But complex PTSD is on a deeper level. It impacts the nervous system, the body and the mind response, the deep-rooted feelings and fears and worries and self-negative reflection on how they view themselves and how they could view themselves within a relationship. And it can create a barrier. It can create a freeze response. So complex PTSD, there is actually a lot more to it on a deeper level. And it could well apply to others out there that, whilst they've got PTSD, it could, have more depth depending on what they've gone through. If you did want to learn more about that within reason, as said, that video is available top right corner in the playlist as well. For now though, let's just focus in general, okay? Because this video can cover a variety of issues, struggles and areas with different people and situations, okay? So if you want to take it on board, feel free. If you just want to sit back, relax, you can do so. If you want to react in the live chat, let me know your thoughts, or if you agree, if you have experienced it, whatever it is, you do whatever makes you feel comfortable. The live chat is on the right side of the screen if you're watching the live premiere. And if it does get too much, a bit too deep, you can always pause the video, have a break, walk away, maybe come back, rewatch at a different point in time. This video will always remain on my channel, so you don't have to worry about that. So no particular order. We've highlighted the importance, first of all, the learning aspect and the importance of, by acknowledging the negatives and what they don't want, it can make it safer for them. And, in other ways, of looking at it. By acknowledging what they don't want, that in itself can create closeness because of that consideration and respect. In the past, it probably was lacking by other partners and other situations, right? So, a trauma survivor, an individual that may have PTSD or complex PTSD, what they don't want, especially in a relationship, they don't want to be fixed. And also, they don't want to be seen as a patient or a project. When it comes to the other half, if they know about them who's struggling with the different symptoms, naturally, the other half, the partner, may want to do more, give more, depending on how close they are, and emotionally, there is that emotional biasness. It's natural, it's normal, but there needs to be boundaries. And that can be hard at first. When everything's so fresh and exciting and fun, if it reaches a blockade or a barrier where it can't progress anymore, but getting on so well, or having that longing feeling of desire and wanting more out of a relationship, for the survivor, they're still finding their feet while still getting on with day-to-day things in life. They're juggling with a variety of possible responsibilities and whatnot. For the other half, they've got their life too. But then they may make it a part of their life to try and help the survivor, help as in emotional support, suggestions, possible healing methods, just being there physically or at least mentally, emotionally, but sometimes that could be too much for the survivor. They likely know it's done out of care and kindness and it's positive, but it might be a little bit overwhelming or a bit too much. To allow some breathing room and space to provide boundaries, healthy boundaries for both parties involved. If boundaries weren't present and it seemed like there was a lot of help and more so fixing, it's one of those situations where they, the one with the symptoms, can't just be fixed like that. Not by the click of the finger, not by word of mouth. An individual that has gone through such difficult times, previous challenging moments, can't expect them to just drop everything, change, heal, just because they found a new partner and be able to move on like nothing happened. That's asking, in a way, for too much. It can also even add a level of pressure and weight on the person with the symptoms, creating an unnatural force in having to be fixed, having to be perfect and healed to be with that individual. It creates a bit of tension and pressure, and in a relationship, when they finally found a new partner, trying to escape the past, trying to live a normal life, trying to be treated normal, seen as normal, even if it's, ordinary and boring, that to them is a luxury compared to the turbulent times of what they've gone through previously. They want to be looked at normal, treated normal, and not seen as some project or patient that needs to be fixed and healed in order for a relationship to exist or continue on. Of course, if there was distance and it felt like it wasn't going anywhere, there might need to be some communication. But it's just important for the partner to know that they can be supportive, but to an extent. If they give any more, if they do too much, it could actually have the opposite, as in negative consequences for that individual with the symptoms. They may either feel pushed back by the pressure, they may crumble because it's too much, they may feel a little bit frustrated, they may feel less normal and feel alien-like in a way, based on what they've gone through in the past, possibly, where they are now, what they wish for, what they hope for, and what they don't want. If they are treated as a project or a patient, even though the other half is just simply being kind, supportive, and very caring, to some it could come across as insulting, and others it could come across as just a tiny bit hurtful. They know it's probably not done, with intent in that way, but the survivor has survived something. They don't want to have to survive more of the same thing or other unnatural negatives. They've come out of a storm. They might feel a bit weary. They've got baggage. They've got weight. The past has carried over. What they likely would hope for is just a bit more normality in life, a bit more peace, a bit more silence, but to be able to have that and share that with another individual present, as in a relationship, to go at a steady pace, volume, and understanding. If the other half, helps too much, does too much, it takes over. In some ways, it could overshadow the actual recovery and journey of that survivor. They've gone through the past, they're trying to heal in the moment and onwards. It's not linear. You can have 2 steps forwards, 1 step back, and it can be back, forth. It can be a bit unpredictable at times for the other half partner that may not know it all or have the knowledge. They may see setbacks or stagnation as a problem, feeling that they need to do more and give more for the sake of the relationship and getting more out of it. But when it becomes a project or when it becomes a mission, it kind of takes it away from the survivor themselves based on what they've gone through. If the other half takes over too much, it could inadvertently come across as controlling behavior, which could be a trigger from the past taking over. They may want to deal with it themselves in their own way, at their own pace and flow. So, of course, there needs to be communication when it comes to that, but there needs to be a level of boundaries too. They've gone through the darkness. They should have the right and on their terms to be able to deal with the darkness and heal, on their terms in their own way. Of course, communication's still needed for that understanding to be put across. But the other half, the partner, needs to realise they can only do so much. They can't just fix someone like that, as much as they may want to, as much as that desire may be to take that pain away from someone. It isn't that easy. It isn't that possible. And the more complex situation it is, and if it is complex PTSD or it's deep-rooted trauma, you can't just pull someone out of it. If they're sinking, if they're frozen, you can't just shake them, wake them up and say, come on, let's get back to normal. Let's continue on with life. You can't expect that from them. They themselves don't want, such high expectations, because that in itself can add pressure too. And furthermore, with it being their trauma, it's also their recovery journey, something personal to them. Dealing with the past on their terms, but in their own way, maybe sometimes by themselves. They still probably wish to be supported, but to some extent. Not overbearing, not over-controlling. If the other half indirectly makes it more about them, even though it's not done with intent, it can come across negatively towards the survivor, who feels like they don't get their own closure because there's the presence of a new person taking over and it's a bit too much. An individual that has gone through hell and back deserves the right to end things or move forwards on their terms and find closure and peace on their terms. If another person steps over the line, puts the foot in the door, it might deny the survivor of that true healing or movement forwards, or it may just slow down the progression. It's one of those things when someone feels like they're doing good and they mean it, it might not always translate that way to a situation or person. So it's important just to acknowledge that even good actions with good intentions can indirectly have consequences. So overall, it's about giving so much as a partner, but not over the top. keeping it somewhat stable and consistent with what they would hope for the sake of stability, but they certainly don't want to be seen as a patient or a person that is too seen as broken or ill, because there's a chance that they themselves already know that. They've told themselves that over and over again. They've felt that for quite some time. They don't want other people to confirm that to them, because it kind of confirms those deeper fears and worries that if they feel broken, if the other half, another partner, kind of acknowledges that themselves, it becomes all too real. One thing having an internal reality, but then when it's expressed externally by other people, it's almost like confirming that it is where it is. So all those worries and fears and negative feelings and thoughts inside have now been confirmed by the outer presence of people. Wasn't done with intent, but you can see the chain reaction of effects that it can have on an individual with the symptoms. And the more complex the trauma is and deep-rooted, the more severe the intrusive thoughts could be, and there might be a freeze response that comes from it. An emotional vulnerability overload, crashing thoughts which hit the switch button, short-circuiting, metaphorically speaking, and withdrawal. They've gone through possibly the abnormal past partners and treatment, deserving of much better. They may not express that direct or think highly of that, but it's what they're deserving of. When it comes to being treated as a patient or project, it's the opposite. It doesn't show in a positive way or light. They want peace, they want normality, they want to be able to just be treated like anyone else and seen like anyone else. Of course, they'd hope to be treated as special and stand out, especially when in a relationship, but for the early stages of one and when it's forming mid-term, they may just want the basics, because the basics to them are a luxury, something that they didn't even have previously in their environment that they were in, the partners that they were with, and so on. Even like the level of peace and quiet, whilst it might be nice being cared for or supported or showered with appreciation and all of that, to them, maybe just a simple, form of closeness, but in silence, without having to talk, without having to perform, is something that they would value and see as a luxury. The ability to sit in peace and silence without judgment, without fear, without consequence, to just be still. So yeah, that's what they may want, and that's what they can get from it if the things that they don't want are avoided, as in treated as a patient, seen as needing to be fixed, because it just confirms to them their deepest worry that they're broken. And if they feel that they're broken, then they can't be with anyone, or no one will want to be with them. It will create that vicious cycle and loop. So it's about trying to avoid that, to avoid those triggers, to avoid those complex traumatic thoughts and intrusive memories. Yeah? And the next one, what needs to be acknowledged, is not to be dismissed, not for things to be minimized, not to be ignored. And that can be with feelings, emotions, thoughts. It can be with being vulnerable, opening up about an event, the past, a current situation, a possible episode. They don't want to be dismissed because there is a chance that they were previously in the past. That could be in a conversation, a debate. It could be about day-to-day talk, small talk, life, buying an item, buying some food, buying some clothes, a present, a gift, talking about a hobby, an activity, talking about football. It could really be anything. But when a person's dismissed, it chips away with time. The more it happens, the more frequency in being dismissed, the less valued they feel. In a previous relationship, if that did happen, Feeling undervalued, feeling underappreciated, it wears on that individual, makes them feel not important and not worthy. It can lead to self-negative talk, believing that what's happened is a result of them not being good enough for that partner or not interesting enough, and that can carry the weight with time into the future. Being dismissed can apply on a deeper level when it comes to being vulnerable. If they tried to be vulnerable in the past for different reasons, the other partner shut them down immediately. That's being dismissed, not being acknowledged, feelings not being validated or heard, not being seen, not being remembered, not being considered. It just makes them feel quite low and less of an individual when the other half should be there for them, supportive, listening, and proactive. When it's not, it has a lasting negative effect. And paired with trauma and vulnerability, if they were to be dismissed, the survivor, it could be a trigger and bring them back to a place where they once were, which they thought they escaped. So what's important, and as well with the minimization, in the present time, if the other half partner, in the presence of the one who has symptoms and struggles, if there's ever a time where there's enough strength and energy for that survivor to speak up about what's going through their mind in the moment or what they're thinking of from the past, whether they're going through an episode or talking things through in general, what's advised and important is to consider listening and avoiding being dismissive. Finding time to listen to them, take notes and take it on board, nodding the head, listening in, genuinely as well. Dismissive could be, half listening and half doing other stuff. You're not fully invested in them in the moment when they're having a real moment or a vulnerable time. If you're half busy listening and doing other stuff, that can be considered as dismissive behaviour, deemed as not important enough to listen truly and have undivided attention to them. So whilst they're pouring their heart out, or whilst they're opening up a void from the past, which is difficult to do, if they see that you're not quite listening or not fully focused, that's dismissive and it puts them down and knocks them back, possibly. That's what they don't want to come from all of that. They want the individual to be able to listen and hear and consider. Body language, as in eye contact, facing that individual. Even hands and feet facing towards that person. When the feet are pointing outwards or in other directions, indirectly it triggers that feeling of, oh, they must be prioritizing other things or preoccupied. That when the feet aren't pointing towards that person during a conversation, it indirectly signifies that that person must need to be elsewhere doing other stuff and they can't hang about. So just little cues of body language like that. Eye contact, hands relaxed, feet facing the person, and just listening. That's the opposite of being dismissive. It's, being present, being punctual, and ready to take things on board. Something what they would really want and wish for. It's kind of like an umbrella term with these features of dismissal, minimization, being ignored. It can be triggering for the survivor because likely that's what they went through, what they were put through previously. And then in contrast, the deep wants and desires to be heard, to be validated, to be remembered, to be believed in, to be considered, the factors, their feelings and thoughts in the moment, and the bigger picture in life and longer term. So as much as what they want and need in a relationship and from a partner is what they don't want that comes with it. And that's the opposite, dismissed, minimized. If the survivor opened up about how they're currently feeling, if they felt low, if they felt scared, anxious, worried, if they needed a bit of confirmation or a form of certainty, if they needed reassurance about either the relationship or a component within it, or a moment in life there was a wobble, a setback, a knockback. Could be indirect, external, could be an indirect trigger or the beginning of a episode or trauma response, a freeze response, self-defense mechanism. A moment like that can be very vulnerable for someone that has struggled for quite some time, and even more of a struggle and demanding, as in vulnerability, when sharing that, opening up and inviting the other partner, other half into their world when things feel like it's collapsing. So the best thing a partner can do to an individual with the symptoms is just be patient, be present, the body language to show that all in. And what's important is what could happen. The survivor may minimize things themselves as a trauma response, something that they've said, done, opened up, revealed about. They may end it abruptly and say, it doesn't matter. How I feel after what I've said, it doesn't matter. It's not that important. That can be a go-to line by, individuals with symptoms and dealing with trauma. They might open up or share fragments, explain pieces, what they can make out and the words that they can express in that moment. And then later on in life, they might do it again and give a bit more detail. But they might, have a closing sentence as in, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. It's not that important. It's okay. Let's talk about other stuff. They are being dismissive of their own needs, dismissive of their own struggles, but they may do it as a form of self-defense mechanism to protect themselves from anything else leaking out, protect themselves from flooding the other half, not wanting to spill or, share too much information because it might overwhelm them. It might make them run away or leave, and that deep-rooted fear of being abandoned. So it's easier just to share so much and then cut the switch, end it there, end the conversation until the next time when it spills over or it's being talked about further. For the other half that's listening in, as much as they may want to help them, as much as they may want to give more and support more, there's only so much that you can do, as in respecting boundaries. But sometimes you've got to do the opposite of what the other person is doing. So if the survivor says it doesn't matter, in code, it means it does matter, but I don't want to talk about it or push it any further because I don't feel that I am worthy or deserving of being put first. Other ways of code word, when they say, it doesn't really matter, it's not that big of a deal, it's old news anyway. Anyway, what else? In code word, it's, this does matter, it is important to me, and, I do want to talk about it, or I want to get closer and I want you to share your thoughts, but I'm worried that if I share too much and say anything else, then you might think less of me. So, sometimes when they say something, they mean the opposite, and how they respond at times may be dismissive, even minimize their own struggles and trauma and play it off like it's nothing or it's not that big of a deal, or even say there's other people out there who've got it much worse, it's not a competition. But for the sake of their trauma response and self-defense mechanism, they're trying to put other things and maybe other people first because they're worried that if they put themselves first and say too much, it could lead to consequences. So it's just easier, safest option in playing it down, minimizing it. Some circumstances, they may minimize the impact, the effect, and what they've gone through, because if they truly accepted it for how it was, it might feel too real to them. And if it's a thought or a feeling that they've been running from or avoiding, if they accept it in the moment, that can be an overwhelm, flooding of emotions and feelings, and it could be too much to deal with in the moment. They might not have the mental capacity or the energy and load to deal with it head on. So there might be a time and place for it all. But the natural considerations that can be done is whenever they say it doesn't matter or it's not that important, after they drip-fed left breadcrumbs behind what they may be going through, how they may be struggling, how their day was without actually saying how it really was. What the other half can do, low pressure reassurance without taking over, and that can be as simple as saying, I hear you. To me, it does matter. In my opinion, how you feel does matter. From my point of view, what you've gone through or what you've shared with me, I do appreciate. And when you're ready and able, I'm willing to listen in to learn more. Your thoughts, your deep thoughts, your deep feelings do matter to me. That's the type of dialogue that can be expressed. You're not telling them what to do. You're not telling them how to think. You're just giving it from your point of view, from your side, what you believe in, what you value. So when you challenge their inner demons, when they say it doesn't matter and you say, well, it does to me, it makes them feel heard for once. It bypasses those demons and targets their core within, what they truly want, what's truly going through their mind, which they can't express or get those words out to. The moment you acknowledge their deep thoughts and feelings, they finally feel heard and understood. But it might be silent, subtle, and invisible, but there's a chance they will feel it within. What's important is not to push it any further, because if you push it too far, it can become overbearing and then it can fall back in line to the patient project category. So it's just low pressure check-ins with counter thoughts, basing it off your opinion, your thoughts, what you value. Because in a relationship, deep down, they will likely value what you feel about things and moments. And if you value them and you put them first, when they consider your needs, that their needs are your needs, it creates that full circuit cycle and a deeper, closer connection with time. What's important, though, is the consistency and the frequency. When they counter themselves and when they downplay how they're feeling and what they've gone through, by reassuring them that it's okay and it is important and it does matter to themselves, it reconfirms that to the one struggling, brings about a safety net, reassurance, slowly rebuilding stability and security, what they want. So by challenging naturally and also acknowledging what to do and what they don't want, or what they do want, but on the outside it comes across that they don't want to continue a conversation, but they don't want to highlight what's really going on. They don't want to acknowledge the depth or the importance of their own thing. In some circumstances, respecting it, but then using one's own point of view to say, well, actually, I think it does matter. I think for me, it is important to know and to learn, and it's what can help in general. That can bring peace of mind slowly, and the more consistent it's done and the more frequent it's done naturally when countering the person's inner demons, it regulates the body, the nervous system. It brings about a new routine, a new flow, and finally being listened to and understood, or at least welcoming the door open for that to be considered. Because likely in the past, whenever they did share thoughts, feelings, or opinions about anything in life, the other partner may have minimized it and said, so what? And does it matter? Those type of lines and words can be hurtful. They're the type of lines and words that could be avoided in the present time, so the other half doesn't trigger the survivor. Because certain words and lines can be like sensory triggers, just like certain smells and scents in the atmosphere, and noises and sounds too. yeah, it could feel like walking on eggshells, but naturally done with just a slight bit of cautiousness and consideration. It doesn't have to become a chore. It's just a few extra steps for the sake of making the other person feel comfortable and acknowledged. And long term, that can build more trust and more closeness. And maybe eventually, with time, not having to be as careful because certain triggers are managed and healed and strengthened, that it's not as triggering. So if there is the odd slip up or mistake, it's not going to feel catastrophic as it would in the very early days when everything is so raw and brand new and the wall is really high and the body and mind could be tense. So when it comes to feelings, when it comes to emotions, when it comes to thoughts, when it comes to opinions, when it comes to the past and the present and even the future, whatever the survivor talks about, it's important to consider listening and not judging and just being present almost 100%, so they feel valued and present and so on. There's a bit of a deeper aspect in a way. And linking on with not being judged, not wanting to be thought of any less. What the survivor may dread and fear if they were ever to talk about their trauma or a component of it or their complex thoughts and feelings, if they did open up and went deep, they don't want the other half to think less of them. That what's happened in the past is the past, but what's carried from it, the damage and the weight and the struggles, is still important. But who they are right now and how they are with that other half, this new relationship, shouldn't be defined or muddied by the past. Almost like a fresh start, but still needing to talk about the past in order to be able to move forwards together and heal individually. For the other half, that can be quite a lot, to listen to acknowledge, and within reason. That's why sometimes it's done in fragments and not all in one go. But, for the person that's gone through it all, talking about it on top of it and talking about it again and again, depending on how many relationships they've been in, if it's not worked out previous, it adds that block, that layer of, unpleasant experience, maybe rejection, maybe abandonment, not a nice place to be. The worries of, don't want that to happen again because this person seems like a good individual. Don't want to be hurt again. Don't want to be judged. Don't want to be looked down upon, and so on. In some circumstances, what the other half can do is to just listen, remain still, not overreact, not act too shocked, not act too surprised, just listen and consider and maintain a stable voice, a stable facial expression to keep it controlled at a very difficult moment if they are revealing a lot. And the more sensitive it is, the more reassurance they probably wish for or hope in some way. So not being judged, allowing them to explain further, connect, heal in their own way. Because whilst they're opening up and talking about things and sharing their thoughts, that is a step in recovery as well. Processing the past, the realization of it, facing it head on or sharing it with another person to have that support and that stability. It's an important time. If a time like that, they're also healing, it's even more important of a moment for the other half to be present and indirectly, whether they know about it or not, to kind of just be there for them. Because whilst they're healing, that requires strength itself. Talking about it, facing the problems head on, requires a level of strength. And they may only have so much. That's why it's important for the other half to just to be there, to be present. It will add a little bit of energy, maybe a little bit of a boost when continuing forwards or trying to make forwards steps. And when there is a fall or a slip, a wobble, that extra level of reassurance is like a safety net for that survivor, in which they didn't have one previous. When they fell hard. The further, deeper they got with someone, the higher they climbed the mountain. And if it ever went wrong, they had a great descent, hitting the ground, starting from the beginning. In this circumstance, being present, active, listening, not overreacting and not judging. It provides a safety net that if they do get so far, and if they do fall, they don't fall as far, they don't fall as hard, and they can regroup themselves almost quicker in a way. The next one is tying on, the feeling and the want of not being given up on. They themselves may have gone through a lot, struggled, and still do. And that can take time to heal. Healing from trauma, dealing with PTSD, complex PTSD, and any other issues or health-related physically, it can take a toll on the body and, of course, the mind and energy within. They may not always be in the same mood every day. They may not always be at their best. They may have low moments. They may have episodes. They may have messy days. They may feel, really low. They may feel really scared. They may even withdraw. They may even freeze. They may even have a deep freeze. And despite all of that chaos, which they supposedly feel or think, what they don't want, what they don't wish for, is for the other half to not only judge, but they don't want the other half to just turn their back and walk away. In some ways, the survivor would understand with the empathy of, yeah, it is a lot to deal with. I am, or at least I feel heavy baggage. I do feel broken. But paradoxically speaking, at the same time, they would hope that the other half is able to stick around, does have the mental capacity and the stamina to be patient, to be still, to be stable in a life in which they themselves may not have at that moment. They want that constant in their life. They want that stability, support, even when it's invisible or when they can't be present to witness it firsthand. It's like they want two things of the opposing situation. They understand if it's too much and too dark that the other person may walk away and leave them. But at the same time, they don't want that to happen either. They don't want to be triggered, as in like put back in a moment from the past where something similar happened, or just a form of losing an individual. And that can tie in with survivor's guilt as well. The guilt of saying too much, sharing too much, and then ruining a relationship, and worried that there's no coming back from it and the other person's not going to see them the same way ever again. Fears and worries like that. Ultimately, a survivor that gets close to another individual and thinks somewhat highly of that new partner, they would hope that things can remain as they are and slowly move forwards in progression, and not for that other person to back up or run away or give up. The survivor knows things aren't perfect, things are difficult, messy, noisy at times, even quiet and silent through withdrawal. That communication may not always be linear or clear. That communication and explaining things may not always be present. It might seem distant at times, and then other times it might seem loving, that push-pull, avoidant attachment dynamic. Difficult, requires energy, can be consuming, but long term, when things can work out or things can heal slowly, it can be all worth it. But that's in the future. When looking back, it's easier to acknowledge it all. But in the present, with what's ahead, it can feel impossible, or it can feel quite a lot. And to that survivor, they've likely calculated it in their mind, or at least it's running through their body inside of what it could be like for the other person, and feeling bad for it and wishing that they could get better or heal quicker or shake the thoughts out of their head so then they could get closer to the other half and show that true love and connection. But there's a process to everything, and things can't always be rushed. Relationships can't be rushed, but also healing and recovery individually can't be rushed. For the other partner, the other half, who may not be going through the same issues but is in the presence of someone that is, best thing to do is, of course, still have open communication as much as possible, but just to try and remain consistent and present in the sphere of that other individual, to know that withdrawal and silence isn't done out of lack of love or darkness, or it's not done with absolute intent. It's the trauma, it's the demons, it's that talking Sometimes they do it to try and protect yourself from their darkness so they don't pull you down. But you might have the stamina and you might be willing and able to be present despite it all because you can handle it and you see the bigger picture and the importance of them. But if they don't see the importance or if they minimize themselves, they're going to stick with what they know best or what they feel is best. And all you can do is just to try and be that lighthouse in the distance, that anchor, that rock. Of course, you have to respect yourself and you have to consider yourself and the time period too. Never neglect that. But for a certain period of time or moments, just to consider the aspect of being present, because likely deep down they fear losing you, but it needs to be done in a genuine way, not done out of emotional manipulation, not done out of it being a chore, not done out of just because you don't want to upset the other person. It needs to be genuine. So obviously the closer the relationship is, the stronger the connection, the more meaning and purpose behind it, and the purpose behind not giving up on someone. The other half may not want to give up on that survivor despite all the mess or the silence, because that other half has seen the good and the light deep down within that survivor, and that light within outshines all the darkness, as in what they've gone through and what they may be feeling on and off. So it is like weighing it up, putting yourself first, putting them first, and trying to find an equal, you know? Some negotiating could be in the sphere of them as the lighthouse, without being overbearing, without giving too much, without taking control, and just allowing them to breathe and do what they need to do, to still be present in some way. And even during silence, to still be present, but to still focus on oneself and whatever needs to be done with time. Not to become a prisoner, but also not to become a deserter for the sake of oneself and for the sake of, the importance of the other half. If something is meant to be or important and worth fighting for, then, those considerations need to be included. So, just not wanting to be given up on. That's what they confer. That's what they don't want to happen, being given up on. The next one, they probably don't want to be shouted at. They don't want arguments. Of course, different situations in life, there can be arguments, there can be disagreements. It's what's normal. But to them, arguments could be worst case scenario because they've dealt with it in the past. Arguments where they were told that they were in the wrong, they were to blame, consequences came from that, emotional wording, blackmail, hurtful words, tone of voice, a loud voice or a loud bang sound followed up by a physical consequence, a form of mistreatment, maltreatment. What they've gone through in the past can leave them tense, can leave them wary and a bit shaky, that if in the new relationship there was an argument or the other half was to raise their voice, not done in a nasty way, just, without thinking, like how anyone else might raise their voice at times, to a trauma survivor, it can be uncertain grounds, as in expecting that with a tone of voice like that, likely it'll be followed with a form of abuse, a form of poor treatment and consequence. Around the right partner, in a healthy situation, relationship, likely not to happen. But to that survivor that has gone through the past, if there are any triggers in the moment, they may associate one thing with another and expect the worst. So it can be hard and painful on the survivor, and it can be difficult for the other half partner, who not done with intent but made to look like a monster. So to get that balance in, the other half, what can they do about it to better themselves and help the other half, the survivor? That is, when there's a disagreement or a slight argument, instead of raising the voice and shouting, speaking at a consistent tone and pace of voice. Keeping it steady keeps the control and keeps the stability. Same tone of voice will bring familiarity with the voice that they're normally associated with. So there does come a time of a disagreement or a falling out. If the other half uses that calm voice or stable one, because they're familiar with it, they'll focus more on that rather than the worrying possibilities of an argument breaking out or a disagreement going wrong. You know, they'll look for the little details and pick up on the little things because they might be hypervigilant, scanning for threats and scanning for dangers to avoid any hurt, any pain, any triggers. If there is stability and there is familiarity, it brings a calming essence within the atmosphere and helps regulate their nervous system. And disagreements in a controlled way without shouting too much, it just makes the environment a bit more healthy, and without all the shouting and over shouting, it allows the survivor to not lose their voice, because that's another thing that can happen. When there's overbearing voices, noises, it can overshadow the survivor, their wants, their needs, their thoughts, their opinions. Just like being dismissed or neglected or minimized. When it comes to talking, some people in life will talk louder to overtalk the other individual. The other person backs down, feels not important, or just submits. That's what could happen in a relationship. That's what may have happened in the past. One person decides to talk louder because they feel more important. They feel what they've got to say is more important, that the other half doesn't have a right or a choice to talk and that their opinion doesn't matter. That's how it can come across. So in a new relationship, if there can be disagreements and the odd falling out, but with steady pacing and tone of voice, that familiarity, that steady pace of talking without it being rapid or erratic, just brings a calming feeling that things aren't losing control or breaking out. Because what they may associate is with a loud voice or the tone shifting, the pacing of words becoming more frequent and often, it drowns out their own worth and it drowns out their own voice. And one thing leads to another. Panic, worry, feeling unloved or feeling unworthy triggers. Keeping it stable brings familiarity and calmness, and it allows them to breathe and still have the opportunity to chip in, share their thoughts, and so on. And it's less likely to bring their guard up, so they're probably going to be calmer a little bit more too. Once again, something like that needs to be consistent with time to build those foundations of a new structure, a new routine in a healthy direction. Okay? Next one, not being pressured or rushed. That can be an umbrella term. It can apply to healing, recovery. It can apply to the relationship in general. It can apply to levels of intimacy, depending on, if it's in real life or if it's online and how close you are to that individual. The survivor may dread the idea of being put into a position where they're put on the spot to either make a choice, to give a suggestion, to make changes, to give ideas, to make the next move, to get better with a click of the finger, to heal, to shake thoughts from the head, just like that, to make it seem so easy when it's really not. They're like the fears and the worries that if that's expected, demanded, or rushed, it feels to them that the other half doesn't really get them, doesn't truly understand them. So there is a disconnect, and with a disconnect, they can feel like the love is lacking or the connection is. So with distance but presence, it feels a little bit isolating, and with their own internal struggles, which is isolating in its own right, it's just compartmentalized, it's compiled together, making it more intense than what it may have been previously. So other forms, as in intimacy and making the next move or the next step. If things are moving slow, if they're a bit cautious or a bit unsure, uncertain, the worst thing that the other half can do is just rush things and speed things up. If it's not going quite at the correct pace, maybe a little gentle nudge communication can be expressed. If that's not possible or too much, the other thing that the other partner could do is just to lower expectations so it doesn't put the pressure on the other half. By lowering expectations, it helps the partner, on the receiving end, who then doesn't feel disappointed or let down. But more importantly, lowering the expectations can help the survivor so then they don't have to perform, they don't have to pretend, they don't have to rush things. Because if anything is rushed, they may regret it later, and that can have its own trauma in a way. If in the past they were forced to do things that they didn't want to do, or they were rushed in decision making, then later regretted their decisions and choices. Triggers, being reminded of past things like that in the present, can hurt and leak over. New trauma can be forged when they may do things that they don't want to do or are unsure of. There's a time and place for everything. The rule could be, you want something but they don't, well then it isn't done. They want something but you don't, it's not done. You want something, they want the same, then it can be done. Like that. Both people have to be on the same page with both lights on green to go ahead, to move forwards, or if to get intimate. I think one of the previous videos that I did in some way is that a survivor may not want to be, over sexualized because of how they may have been treated previously in the past. They want to be treated with respect and all of that without, anything being taken or any innocence being removed. What they lost in the past, they want to regain now and build a shield in a way. A shield of respect, self-respect, and how people perceive them. It can translate the same way with doing things on their own terms without being rushed or pressured, whether that be sharing a photo, whether that be sharing a phone number, whether it be getting closer physically, whether it be meeting up. It could be anything really. They may not be ready. They're still dealing with the past or slowly healing and slowly finding their footing in this new relationship. The other partner that may be ready to pull the trigger is waiting, lower the expectations to avoid any burnout, to slow things down, to enjoy the moment and to enjoy the smaller moments and the smaller steps by the other half, so it's more healthy, it's not as pressuring. Because look at it this way, what the survivor doesn't want to be pressured and to be rushed. If they were, they're not going to feel good. They may feel anxious. They may feel pressure. They may regret it afterwards if they do something that they don't want to do or aren't ready. It can damage the relationship. But direct or indirectly, if the other half puts that pressure and rushes the survivor, they themselves aren't doing them much good. The other half is indirectly putting pressure on themselves by having higher expectations. Having higher expectations can lead to an underwhelming feeling if it's not quite met for themselves, for the other person, and vice versa. It can create a toxic environment. So it's like trying to level with the other person, try and be on the same wavelength, or just have that patience and understanding to an extent. When it's not rushed, when something does happen, it's more genuine and it's meant more. If they decide to level up, make the next step, suggest something, it comes from a place in their heart of what they want, what they are ready for. And when they're ready, it's more real. And when it's more real, it's more felt. And when it's more felt, closer connected. If things are rushed or sped up, it doesn't feel as real. It may not feel as special. It may not be as fulfilling. And to a survivor that may want things and deep down desires, if they don't quite reach that or get that from what they hoped for because it was rushed, they may not be able to look beyond and think there's much more, there's a future. So it's like a balancing act. And just in general, avoiding pressure and rushing allows them to regulate their nervous system. Who knows what happened in the past where they may have been put on the spot. In its own way, being put on the spot can trigger brain fog, where the mind goes blank, unable to answer questions, unable to share thoughts, feelings, express themselves. It could be a deep conversation, it could be small talk, when they're put on the spot by someone that they look up to, it kind of catches them off guard. And it might trigger an intrusive thought from the past where they once were. And that can bring a level of an episode, withdrawal, not personal, but still protecting themselves, but it also slows down the progression in that relationship and it reduces the chances of it being seen as a safe space. Avoiding arguments or reducing it, controlling voice and tone and distance and boundaries, it just sets a safe place, a safe environment, which they probably want, a sanctuary, which they want to share with you, the other half, but it needs to be put into play with action and words, slowly, steadily, with time, within reason, and communication being expressed both ways with time too. It's not just a one-way street. Now, the other thing is, a survivor likely doesn't want to be interrogated or over-questioned, as in what they do during the day, at moments, what they're up to, and all the little small details. Yes, asking questions can show that the other half is interested and considers the partner in a positive way, but too many questions can be overwhelming. Maybe at times specific, deep questions and closed questions can seem like they're put on the spot. Once again, beside being interrogated, it can create pressure, and with pressure, it can lead to demands and expectations, which to them can feel like pressure. Whether that be explaining where they've been, what they've done, whether it be questions in regard to demands of why have they gone silent, why have they not messaged back, what are they up to, why haven't they reached out, where are they? All those questions can be very scary to the other half that is dealing with their own scary thoughts and feelings within, and then having to face the music of someone they're supposed to be close to, like impacted, affected, and as well, asking questions. It's like layers on top of layers. There might have been a time in the past where that survivor was questioned and interrogated by a bad partner, as in, what are you wearing? Where are you going? When will you be back? Who are you going with? Why are you doing that? Why are you being like that? Why are you like this towards everyone? That can cross the boundary and break that personal private space, The survivor, the one with the symptoms, wants to do their thing, do their own thing, have their own privacy and moments and whatnot. When there's too many questions and put on the spot, it feels like that their private space is being invaded. And that might have happened in the past. They want some peace, they want some moments to themselves and to have the ability to do their own thing and think separately. So they're not controlled, they've got the space to breathe. They don't want to be interrogated because it's likely a trigger to how they were interrogated in the past. Questions, of course, are necessary and healthy, but too many or too deep could be overwhelming or flood the person's mind. And as well, in the style of an interrogation, a barrage of them, it can put pressure on the survivor to possibly answer or go into the fawning effect of people-pleasing, which causes them distress, delayed distress, and delayed triggers. It could push them back, leading to them withdrawing from the relationship, possibly. So it's just about being careful and considerate to some extent. And during the moments where things are intense or there's been a silence, that if they do return, if they do show up, for the other half to not completely neglect, but also to not just jump on in immediately. A person that comes back from a low episode, a triggering moment, a night terror, comes back from a long, deep freeze or a severe freeze, the one thing that they probably don't want is to be interrogated immediately. They've interrogated themselves for weeks, days, months, however long, internally. But now they just want a normal life, or they just want to feel a level of normality for the moment, for a few hours until the music hits or until they decide to open up and explain on their terms when they're ready so they can explain it clearer. Because you've got to look at it from the sake of the other half, whilst they've got to be patient and wait, still get on with things. But for the benefit and the peace of mind of the other half that may want closure and understanding and learning and progression, sometimes it's for the best to be patient and to lower expectations and not to demand, because if you demand and rush the other person, they may give you the answers that you want, but not what you truly need to hear. Or they may give only part of the story and not the full context. In other circumstances, if you rush or force them, interrogate, they may not give an answer because the pressure has led to brain fog, so they can't think clearly, and then they can't give you an answer. And then you get nothing out of it. All you might get is more silence because you've scared them or pushed them away. So you've got to consider yourself as well as the other person's feelings to get the best outcome naturally. Allow them time to breathe and space. Allow them to do their own thing when they want or when they need to. Same with the recovery as well. But still be able and provide that support space, that presence, that frequency, that familiarity, a level of calmness to an extent. And as well, to allow them, when they do regain that strength, when they overcome their demons or their episode, that when they come back, they can at least feel normal again or be treated normal until it's time and for them to be ready to express themselves, whether that be to apologize or to give clarity or whatever it is. They get the space and the moment. And then that will help the other half in learning, understanding, and just making progress with time, because it goes both ways in learning about one another. Now, the other one is that they don't want constant noise. That can tie in with being interrogated and questions. It can tie in with arguments and loud voices. Constant noise, they already deal with that probably in their head, with the demons, the intrusive thoughts, the feelings. If they've got OCD, repetitive loops, looping thoughts and conversations from the past, previous encounters, what was said, what was done, regretting or overthinking things in a way. That can be a lot of noise inside. And even when they withdraw or freeze, silent on the outside but noisy on the inside. When they're in a relationship or around another person, what they don't want is external noise because they're already dealing with enough. So in some ways, they don't want the other half to be like really loud, whether that be talkative, whether that be demanding, whether that be forceful, whether it be interrogating, things like that. And even metaphorically as well. Likely what they may want is just to be able to sit in silence, non-verbal communication, but still feeling close to the other half. In the house, in a park, in a cafe, somewhere where they can be together without the noise. It allows them to escape the noise from within, to find peace elsewhere externally, and bring that external peace temporarily internally inside, and to share that with another person that they're close to. It ticks many different boxes, short-term, long-term, and the frequency of it can rebuild that stability and that strength within that individual. These are like passive forms of healing, little adjustments made to make it easier and better and safer for the person with the symptoms. Done not out of a chore, but done out of love and care. So it's natural and it's wanted both ways. And it's done because it's important to each person, right? The constant noise can be quite draining and tiring. So when it's not there and what they dread, what they hate isn't present, it calms them. They may have dealt with noisy environments in the past and presence of people noisy in body language, in behavior, and so on. Sometimes, as a paradox, complete silence or a cold attitude previous could have created a lot of noise, as in the lack of noise was deafening as a paradox. The silence or the level of coldness was too noisy and created a lot of internal worry and panic. So as an extension to what they don't want in a relationship as of present time, they likely don't want, and they also fear, the other half in ever being cold. Like what I said about being dismissive or minimizing, that can come across as being cold. If they've been with a cold person previous, that can be traumatizing as well. Or when they're opening up with vulnerabilities and the other half, the bad ex, is just cold, nonchalant, not really caring, not reacting within the interest and the care of the other half that is struggling. That coldness can be a setback, a knockback, and it can leave the person feeling exposed and undervalued. So in the present time, that's not what they would want, because it would be a trigger in a way to a past memory, an encounter. Another one, which is more obvious, but it falls as an umbrella term. A survivor, what they don't want is to be controlled over emotions and feelings and actions and behavior and plans and options and all of that. They may have their own structure, their own routine, their own plans. If another half comes on in, even if it's done out of care and love, if it's overbearing, it can be overwhelming. And if it's too much, it can come across as controlling. Not just with action, but with words. With words, language, communication. If it's, directed by the other half, as in, you should do this, you should do that. Stop thinking this and stop thinking that. Stop worrying. Stop being negative. That's the type of language which they would dread because it does no good. It's commands, it's demands, and that can put them on the spot. It can be pressuring, but also triggering, because by demanding them to do something or controlling them, not only does it trigger them from a past time where a bad ex may have been controlling, as in what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, feeling trapped. They don't want to feel that again. But on top of it all, if the other half, the new partner, ends up using demanding language and ignorant words, it can make the survivor feel like they're not being heard or listened to, especially if they've opened up already or expressed themselves. If the other half is like, yeah, whatever, stop being sad, stop being negative, just get on with it, that's not what they want to hear, and it probably could hurt them badly and knock them back badly. So like what we said earlier about, if the survivor says, well, it doesn't matter, my feelings don't matter, what I've done, what I've said, it's okay, it doesn't matter, it's not a problem, it's not a big deal. Well, actually, to them, it is a big deal, it does matter, but they're not going to admit it. If they admit it, they may feel like a burden on the other person. If they admit it, they may feel cheeky or selfish for doing so. If they've got survivor's guilt, they may not want to open up because they don't feel deserving of because of the past. Challenging it with opinions. Well, I think it's important. I think you are valued. I think you are helpful. I believe, in my opinion, that you are a good person. Giving opinions is a low-pressure option at providing alternative perspectives for them to consider in their own way at some point. The same way it can be applied when it comes to not wanting to be controlled. As in, they may want something or they may need something, but they may not ask for it or make it clear. But at the same time, they don't want like an overload. They don't want someone to take over completely. They, in a way, will say, I've got to get on with things. I just got to get on with it. I just got to get on and keep on doing it. But they don't have to do it alone, but they may feel like they have to because that's all they know and how they were treated and let down in the past and betrayed. They built up a mask, a wall, a hard shield. Deep down, likely, when they say they've just got to get on with it, the opposite is inside. They don't want to get on with it. They've had enough. They just want to collapse. They want to fall. They want to sleep. They want to rest. So whenever they say, not always, but when they say, I've just got to get on with it, or I've got to be independent, deep down, it's probably the opposite. Inside, they might be screaming, you know what, for once in my life, I want to be able to rely on someone else. I want someone else to take this weight and load off of me, even if it's just for a few seconds or minutes, so I can feel more like myself, so I can finally breathe properly. That's what can happen. But if that's what you sensed as the other half within that survivor, and you took direct action, it could be counterproductive. So you got to stay with the opinions and the thoughts and the feelings. So if they say, I've just got to get on with it, or it's just me, I'll get it done. As the other half, what can be said to them is, I hear you. In my opinion, I think, if you ever do need help, or if you do need to open up, I'm here. Something like that, low pressure. Giving them the option, giving them the opportunity, and making it clear that there is an alternative. Not everything has to be done how it always has been. Things can change to help them, to lighten the load, to bring closeness together in dealing with it together. So it's like reading in between the lines. When they say one thing, they may deep down feel the opposite, but they don't know how to express or show it. They may not show it. They may not rely on someone because they're scared that if they do, they may become dependent. And whilst that can be a comforting feeling deep down for them, if anything went wrong and they became reliant, it's like when taken away, they fall. That safety net has gone. If they're going to get reassurance, they need reassurance. They want reassurance. They don't want a free trial. They don't want it temporary. They may want it long term. So then they can open, so they can fall back, so they can relax, so they can share things more and allow the other person to step up too and purpose to be created. But there is a process behind it, and it can be starting off from opinions and suggestions, low pressure check-ins on that other half, the survivor. So it's not rushed, because once again, if things are rushed, it may not be natural. The outcome may not be desired by both parties, as in what it should or could have been compared to what did happen under those circumstances. Now, other things. Don't want to become reliant because of the fears of if it goes wrong and falling hard. But as well, in other ways, that the survivor deep down probably doesn't want to always be on. What does that mean? Always being on, as in performing, pretending everything's okay, pretending to be fine, functioning but suffering inside. The mask. They may wear that mask around family members, friends, best friends, colleagues, clients. Keeping that mask up, pretending everything is okay to avoid questions, to avoid pity, to avoid being looked down upon, to avoid being judged, is tiring and time-consuming and uses up a lot of energy and social battery. So when they're finally at home, or when they're finally in a relationship, the one thing that they don't want to do is have to perform, because they actually want to be real. But they may not open up about that or talk about it. They'll feel it within, what they don't want, what they hope, and so on, but they can't express it because they feel if they did, they worry it might push the other person away. They want to be themselves, but at the same time, they fear being themselves because of how they may act and things they may say and share, that it might be too much for the other half. So it's like a double-edged sword. Keeping things together, but using up a lot of energy and masking it, pretending everything's fine when it's not, at the cost of harming the relationship, because if they've got to perform and be on, they're basically faking it till they make it, or faking it just so they can get by. In a relationship, they likely don't want to fake anything because they want that relationship to be real, because it might be the one thing that they felt that's real the first time in their life. If that's fake as well, or it's not truly genuine and organic, they may feel like nothing is in life, and they may disassociate or start disconnecting and questioning more because they don't know what is real. They don't know how to feel real. They may not have a space or an environment where they can be just themselves. And being just themselves can be quiet, a little bit withdrawn, a silent voice, not as chatty, not as happy. For the other half, to some extent, the other half should be welcoming of that, not just to fall in love with that person for the bubbliness, the brightness, and the kindness and all that, but to also love them for their darkness, their rawness, their, you know, what they really think about a situation or other people. You know, they may want to drop that mask and say, you know what, okay, I've been here, I've done that today, I've seen this client, I've been around these people, and you know what, I can't really be asked. Oh, a friend wants to come round or hang out with me, but to be honest, I can't be bothered. Yeah, they mean well, but, you know, sometimes it can be a bit too, you know, watching over me too much, tracking me, my movements. It's a bit too suffocating. I just wish they would tone it down, but I understand why they're doing it, because they care. And I don't want to disrespect that. So I'll wear a mask, I'll pretend everything's okay to minimize it, to appreciate them. But it's still so draining and tiring. I wish I could just fall back, be myself in their voice, and actually be able to do that around someone, to feel more normal, to be treated more normal, and to be respected even when I might not be okay. When lowering the mask and being one's true self and still wishing and hoping that the other partner sees them the same way as they did before. No change, stability, and frequency. And it helps the other partner. The other partner sees the real side of that survivor. It brings closeness and more equalness with time. So it can be a positive. The reason deep down why a survivor doesn't want to be always on in a relationship, like how in real life and elsewhere, because it uses up a lot of energy, and being on can mean being fake. And in a relationship, it might be the one area that they want it to be real, the touch, the emotions, the connections, physically intimate, and just general day to day. They want that to be real, so then it can touch their heart and fulfill and connect all the dots and all the things that they desire and wish for. If they're in a makeshift, fake, built up relationship which has no foundations or structures, it's very weak and it could collapse. They want it to be real. They want it to be weathered through the storm, so then it holds more certainty in their life and the other person's, that it's built and meant to stay and not temporary. Because what they've had previous is like temporary. It wasn't meant to be, or it may have not been truly long term, but they may have been promised a lot and didn't receive enough back. So now, hyper vigilant, hyper aware, checking, scanning for threats, wanting it to be real, wanting it to be genuine. And maybe that feeling of the way to test that is to be real and to drop the mask, but then the double-edged sword of what if it goes wrong? So reluctant. The other half, the partner, what can they do? Just be present, to listen, to validate, acknowledge them, and everything above what we said earlier, as in the steps, working towards this aspect of them feeling safe enough and secure enough to be vulnerable without consequence, to drop the mask without consequence and actually be themselves. By being themselves, they release pressure, release tension, release any weight, and by releasing any weight and tension, it will make it easier on the heart and the mind to open up those repressed thoughts, the positive ones, the desires and the needs, which can lead to a bit more open flowing communication, but that comes with time. So you see both ways and the long-term aspect, but it needs to be consistent and somewhat frequent to build that security and that reliance, almost like a routine in a way. Now, besides that, don't want to carry all the weight. That's tying on with what we just said a bit before. That a survivor, whilst they feel they have to, they need to, and they don't want to offload onto the other half, deep down, in some ways, they feel like, well, the other partner's present. In some ways, I wish I could just take some of the load off, pass it on to them, or share it with them and resolve it together. More efficient, easier, more stable, and less isolating. But double-edged sword, they may fear it might be hard or difficult and it might backfire on them, so they feel they have to hold it all themselves. But once again, if the other half can suggest, as in opening up and there's other ways around it. It can bring about a level of reassurance very slowly with time. Now, beside that one, they don't want to plead. So what this says, a little bit deeper, when it comes to situations, whether that be a falling out, a disagreement, a mistake being made, and if the survivor feels to blame for it or they've made a mistake themselves, whilst they may do it, what they don't want to do, especially in a proper, more genuine relationship with a better person, deep down, they don't want to be a people pleaser. They don't want to have to plead or fawn towards the other half. It all wants to be natural and just with the flow, okay? Role play, that's separate. That's different. But if it feels like that, the survivor has to prove something to the other half or has to make it up, but it's in a slightly unnatural way where the survivor feels that they owe the other person something, it can add an emotional debt in the moment or long term. And whilst it may have worked in the past, but they did it because they had no choice as a survival mechanism. Pleasing the other half to protect themselves, to avoid consequences and doing things and intimacy, which maybe they didn't actually want to do, weren't ready for, but they did it anyway to calm the situation, to protect themselves, but also to kind of please the other half. If there's any pleasing going on in this new relationship, it should be two-way, not one-sided, as in one person is made to feel like they're to blame or they have to make up to the other half, and the other half is deemed as deserving of receiving it all, but in a forced way or in a bit of a dark, twisted way. You know what I'm saying? What can the other half do if they're genuine, but the survivor partner may be overly apologetic? They can't help it, but that's just how they are. They may plead, they may beg, they may over-apologize. For the other half to lower it slowly, any debt, any guilt, and ease it, to give an opinion, to say, well, it's okay, it's fine, I'm okay, no need to worry. Low pressure signs like that. So if the person over apologizes, feels they're to blame when they're really not, low pressure check-ins just to say, I'm okay, no worries, like that. Not to challenge them, not to force them to change their way of thinking, not to force them to convince themselves that they don't have to apologize, but just to give a different perspective. It can lower the tension. And if it lowers the tension, then they may feel that they don't have to give, they don't have to force intimacy to regulate a situation or to regulate an argument, that things can be ironed out without any demands and without any expectations and without anything being forced. So if anything is given or reciprocated, it's done naturally and at the right time. So like how earlier we said about things being over-sexualized or forced, it can fall in that category too. But if both people want it, then it should be accepted. If one person wants it, the other person doesn't, then it shouldn't be done. If the other person does it because they feel that they need to, the other half needs to make it clear that, so it doesn't get blurred, just to be careful. Because what can happen in some circumstances, if the survivor feels like they have to please the other partner in some way, whatever that is, they may feel a role, a responsibility. Deep down, they may not want to, or they may just not feel ready, but they feel like they have to because of the past. They do what they do, they may regret it afterwards. They may think less of themselves. They may blame themselves. They might be re-traumatized from the past. So to avoid that escalation and to avoid rejection or abandoning them, because it's got to be done very carefully, is to delay it. And what that means is, if there was a people-pleasing moment and they felt obliged to, but they really didn't want to, the other half, what not to do is to say, I don't want that, or get away from me, don't kiss me, don't do that, don't do that. That can come across as harsh, cold, and rejected, whilst you, in a way, are denying it, and deep down they don't want to do it. Whilst you're on the same wavelength there, how it's delivered can be interpreted different, as in the survivor will see that as rejection and a lack of love, or they think less of me. Oh, Did I come on too strong? Did I do too much? Did I do something wrong? Do they not care anymore? It can spiral. The most effective way around it, so both parties are okay, and it's quite deep, is that if there's a people-pleasing, fawning moment and they over-apologise or they feel in one's debt, the other half can negotiate without it being obvious. So, if the survivor says, "I'm so sorry, please forgive me, I'll make it up to you right now," or "I'll make it up to you a bit later," what could be suggested is the other half says, "Okay, that sounds good," in a natural tone of voice, so it's familiar, or, "Ooh, okay, that sounds fun, that sounds exciting," but what could be considered is wording it as acknowledging that I appreciate that gift, I appreciate, making it up, but no rush. We can still do it, or that can still be done, but there's no rush. As in, it could come into conversation, "Ooh, that sounds really good. Oh, I can't wait for that. Oh, nice. But can I just finish this off? Can I just get some work done? I need to just do something first, and then can we do it after?" And they'll be like, "Oh, sure, okay. Because it confirms to them that their gift, their offering hasn't been rejected or turned down. So things are still to play for. They still have the opportunity in their mind to make things up to the other partner in which they feel responsible for. But they're not timed, they're not rushed. That's critical. Indirectly, passively, what happens during that span of time, whilst they feel like they've got to make it up to the other half acknowledges it and says, "Okay, later," or "a bit later." In that span of time in between, it allows the nervous system and the mind to regulate itself. Giving that time just to breathe and to reflect allows them to change their mind if they feel it's not the right time for them. Or like if it's intimacy, it gives them that period of breathing to reflect without regret. Reflect without any shame, because it's not happened yet. Nothing has happened yet. There's no rush. So it's difficult to pick up on, but if the other half can accept that fawning response without rejecting it and negotiating by giving a time estimate, as in, is it okay if we do it a bit later, or could we possibly do it at lunchtime or just after lunch? I just need to get some work done. I just need to collect something. I need to just do this little chore and then we'll do it, or this can be done. That span of time of waiting, it allows them just to regulate their thoughts, their feelings. So when the time does come round for it, the next step is for the other half not to initiate it, just to be present and wait until the other half brings it up. And if they really want to, they've had the time to think and regulate that it may not be forced as much. If they do forget, if they don't bring it up, if they don't suggest it, that is a sign, a possible sign, that they never wanted to do it in the first place under those circumstances, but they felt that they had no choice but to because of being influenced by the past and how they were made to feel, what they had to do in response to make it up, and how the bad person accepted the gift. You get what I'm saying? That span of time in reflecting and thinking it through without the pressure, without the presence of anyone else. If they want to go off silently and not do that action or make it up and just forget like it never happened, to the other half that can monitor that without acknowledging it, it can just bring a level of understanding that it just wasn't meant to be at that moment. And if it did, if it was followed through with, it may have not been natural, it may have been forced, and to them, they may have not really wanted it at that moment, and it could have triggered a past memory. So it's like avoiding but not rejecting them as a person. It's like delaying a certain action just to make sure that they definitely want to do something or they don't, in a controlled way. But it's got to be done subtle. If not, it comes across as rejection. It comes across as not being loved or turned down. So it's got to be done carefully through non-verbal communication. Okay? So other little factors as well to acknowledge. A partner, survivor, probably doesn't want their vulnerability, their trauma to be used against them in obvious ways and more manipulative ways, because there's a chance that that could have been done in the past. They and their trauma can be difficult. If it's used against them, then it confirms to them that it's like their weakness that can be taken advantage of, which hurts them, trust issues, betrayal, trauma, re-traumatized. If it's been used in the past, triggered as in being taken advantage of. More hurtful, more painful when it's someone close to your heart. So that's definitely something that they wouldn't want. Something a partner should never use against that survivor. Even when there's arguments, even when there's a flare-up, when things are tense, never to use their trauma or vulnerability against them as some kind of calling card. And deep down, they themselves probably dread and fear that, especially if they've gone through it previously. So that's something just to consider. Another one, that they, the survivor, don't want to be told they're too much. Told that they're too much work, too demanding, too messy, things like that, because all that may do is just confirm in their own mind what they may be ruminating on, demons, as in they don't deserve to be loved, they don't deserve to be with someone, they don't deserve to be happy. It just solidifies it. So the best thing that can be done is not to say that in the first place. And to be honest, you shouldn't really be saying it to begin with if you care about someone. So there's that. Another one on the sideline is surprises, whether that be physical or emotional. Sometimes survivors and trauma-related people may not like surprises sprung upon them because they've been surprised in the past, but that surprise came with shock and horror and not happiness. Maybe more on physical, intimate levels, not sneaking up on someone, not grabbing them, not tickling them unexpectedly, not hugging them unexpectedly, but making a gentle sound to let them know that the presence of you are about and whether they're ready or not to welcome you into their space, metaphorically speaking, you know? In other situations where a person doesn't have trauma or a past, being snuck up on, being scared but not with harm, may not do too much to the body or mind. It might be temporary, it might be a little jump, a little jolt, but to a trauma survivor, it might make their heart jump. It might make their heart sink, their gut, deep down feeling, worry, discomfort, panic, short term or a bit long. It could bring on a panic attack. It could bring on an indirect form of re-traumatization because if they were grabbed, if they were surprised, if they were caught off guard, back then. It happening now in a more playful way, they might not see it or feel it that way in the moment. It could be a trigger to the past and bring on distress and worry. So about respecting boundaries and basically checking the social cues, the body language and behavior, what's acceptable, what isn't, what are they tense, are they relaxed? Making a gentle sound before approaching them is probably what's best. If you're behind them, if you're from a distance, clearing your throat, knocking on the door, or a little gentle tap. Those sensory little tapping sounds bring a level of peace and calmness. They associate that with you, that familiarity of safety. They welcome you in, and you go at it at a steady pace without it being rushed, without it being forced. Surprises like gifts and presents might be too much at times. If they've been given gifts and surprises in the past, it may have formed a trauma bond, as in bad partner harms, the person with the symptoms, gets hurt, apologizes, gives them a reward, a gift, apologizes, makes up, and then repeats the same actions, hurts them, rewards them, hurts them, a trauma bond. And if they picked up on that certain surprises, even if it's done with intent, goodness, it could trigger a past memory, an intrusive thought, even if it's indirect. So it's just about being careful there. And in some ways, It might not always have to be a physical surprise, but an emotional surprise in a positive way. But if things have been sprung upon them in the past without any prior warning, it can lead to being put in a difficult situation where there's an act, there's a demand, there's a request, or there's a present, and they feel like they have to honour it. They may feel like they have to accept it or follow through with something because they don't want to disappoint the other half. They don't want to let the other half down. If it's in a crowded area or familiar faces, they don't want to let anyone down. They may not want to make a scene, but in the past, a surprise like that may have been calculated and manipulated, doing it in such a way that it pushes and forces them into a corner of a room where they've got no escape and no choice but to do it, because if they don't, they risk, to them, making a show of themselves, embarrassing themselves. That's how they might feel inside. Feeling like a bad person or a bad partner, letting the other person down, letting everyone down. It was calculated from the beginning to ensure that it would be done and that the survivor, the one at the time of the symptoms, would have no choice but to follow through with it, which then can later lead to being pressured, being forced, and then regret afterwards, and not feeling quite happy and, feeling like they're in their own body, under their own skin, not disassociating, feeling disgusted or feeling horrible, like that. So surprises and putting something onto them when they least expect it could lead to being put on the spot and having to perform when they don't want to perform. They don't want to be on. They don't want to please. They want to be able to accept when they can and when they're ready. Subtle presence, subtle gifts. Not too full on, not too unexpected. Whereas in other situations, the unexpectedness can be fun and exciting to a trauma survivor that probably wants stability, safety, security, and peace and all of that. Things that are unexpected can turn everything upside down, and that might be too much, in the early stages at least. So it just needs to be considered. Now, moving on to survivor's guilt, just as important. An individual with trauma who may also have survivor's guilt, or one or the other. What would a survivor's guilt individual not want in a relationship or when around other people? That could be that they don't want to be told it's not their fault, because likely they've been told that 1,000 times already. And whilst it might be meant in a genuine way and in an honest way, the people that say it's not your fault, they're the people that may have not gone through it themselves. For the individual that has gone through it and is dealing with it, being told it's not their fault doesn't help, because they can't see past their own thoughts and feelings. They were there to experience it, or at least to feel responsible. No one else was. So anyone else that says it's not your fault, their thoughts or opinions, in a way, are invalid. Not for that to sound rude, but for the survivor, the one that feels guilt, they were there to experience it, others weren't. So how would you know what it's like and how it truly feels? So it's a sensitive area in a way. In a relationship, what can a partner do to someone that feels survivor's guilt to the past? Not to tell them that it's not their fault. Not to tell them it will be okay. Not to tell them to just move on. Not to tell them that that person is no longer present. But just to give opinions and suggestions, low pressure, for example. A low pressure check-in towards someone with survivor's guilt could be, I hear you, and the weight and how it must feel or how it could feel. The way I see things, or at least in my opinion, which is obviously limited, I feel that you're not to blame, but I get if you don't agree with me. I just want you to know that, from my opinion, is that not everything can be controlled in life, and everyone has a certain role or responsibility. So in such a relationship previously, you could only do so much, give so much, and control so much. The other half had to play a role too, the previous ex-partner. They did so much, or they could do so much. If they weren't, or not being honest, or not functioning, or not communicating, you're not to know. Or at least, in my opinion, that's how it can come across. If you don't know, you don't know. You can't be a superhuman. You can't have superpowers all the time, you know? But I get it, as in how it feels. Or I can almost imagine what it could be like. You know, something like that. Just a little low pressure check-in like that. And the more low pressure it is, the less likely the person is to be resistant to it. So it bypasses the self-defense mechanism because there is nothing to resist, because it's just an opinion and that's it. It's not a demand, it's not a request, it's not an order. So the survivor isn't going to feel under attack by it. That's what's important. To get words and feelings through, you need to be able to bypass their defense, their wall. Demanding language, not going to work. Going to push back. But calming language, sensitive words and consideration can help longer term. And the frequency of it can help change their mind, but not forced. It allows them to change it themselves and consider the other possibilities that they can't control, or from an opinion, they can't control everything. They're not to know everything. And if there's a lack of communication from the other side, if the other side hides things, how are you supposed to know? What I would suggest as well is a little bit deeper, and it probably something that should be just suggested gently with time, is that if the survivor feels to blame for the ex-partner's death, one thing to consider for that survivor is if an opinion is given which they don't agree with, for example, you're not to know what they're going through, they can pretend to be perfect and fine and happy at the time, or however they are, when they've got other means and other motives going on in their head, what they're going to do next. They put on a mask, they act, they perform, they deceive you. What are you supposed to think or do about that? If you believe them, you believe them, and if they appear quite natural and normal, you're not going to know. And when it comes to certain circumstances like that, it can be unexpected most of the time. You're not going to know until it's too late. If the survivor says, yeah, but I still feel it's my fault, I should have done more, I should have known more, I should have known more about them, you've got to flip it in the present moment, as in, well, as your partner, like you said, you might be good at hiding your PTSD from people. You might be a master at masking it, pretending everything's fine, being bubbly, happy and chatty and so on. But deep down, you might not be, but you don't want to show that. So you convince everyone that you're functioning fine and successful. If anything went wrong, or if there was a withdrawal or a silence or a freeze, would anyone, think, oh, well, it's not my problem, it's not my fault, they're struggling, they've got issues, they're withdrawing to heal? Is everyone going to not blame themselves? Is everyone just going to know that it's a trauma response? Likely not. What could happen is a friend, a best friend, the partner could blame themselves even when it's not their fault. Oh, I should have done more. I should have been more supportive. I should have been more patient. I should have asked more questions. I should have double checked if they were okay when they said they were fine. I should have checked in on them. I should have called them even if I don't often call. I should have, sent a low pressure message. I shouldn't have left it this long, the silence. I should have taken more action and said more and done more, and then it may have prevented them withdrawing. And you know what that survivor will probably say? Yeah, but it's not your fault. It's my problem. It's my mess. I didn't explain myself. I never said what was going on. I hide my PTSD rather well. I hide it from people. So you're not going to know. If I've not explained it, as in how I feel and how I respond and react, you're not going to know what caused it, why it happened, and the context behind it in general. If I don't tell you, you don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know. Well, isn't that exactly what a possible ex-partner did? As in, they didn't tell you what was going on in their head, what they were considering on doing. Signs and words and language, like really clear language and communication. If they hid it from you, How are you supposed to know? The same way as if you struggle but you don't share or explain or you hide it, everyone else isn't going to know either, but they may blame themselves because they feel responsible when they're not. Just like how you feel responsible for something in the past when they didn't actually tell you or communicate with you. It's like a cycle, a food chain from one to another. You get what I'm saying? So that's a deeper level of perspective, okay? If you can compare it from the past to the present to the future in third person, like how I did then, it can bypass it, okay? It's not about blaming, it's about perspective. If they can't see it from the past, maybe they can see it in the present. If they can't apply it towards another situation, maybe they can apply it towards themselves with a current moment, you know, in some way or another. But their thoughts and words in the moment can be true, definitely. But those same thoughts and feelings can be true to the past, which they haven't considered, right? So, beside that, other things that they may not want in a relationship is to not be forced in moving on. No expectations or demands, that they've got survivor's guilt, it's a heavy load to carry and it takes time to work it through and deal with in their own time. If the other half just says move on or, rushes it, what could happen is the survivor does move on in that relationship, but it's not been treated properly. Unresolved trauma, unresolved grief, unresolved guilt. That bubbles underway, can get worse. It can lead to them struggling much worse in the future, and it can lead to the relationship being under strain and breaking apart. So things need to be dealt with and looked at slowly and not overlooked and not rushed. If it's rushed and overlooked, it doesn't get resolved and it builds with time and it eats away and it gets problematic for that person. So something to consider. But in other ways, what they don't want, like with survivor's guilt, is they probably don't want trauma to be compared. If it's not the same, it shouldn't be compared, especially in tense moments where they're dealing with a strong feeling. When things are compared, if done incorrectly, it can lead to it being insulting in a way. In other ways, one person's trauma, big or small, more severe or less, when compared to, the survivor with what they're going through, it can come across as dismissive and minimization. Maybe in the eyes or the mindset of the one with the survivor's guilt or the PTSD or the combination, another person could come in with their own trauma story, completely different, unrelated, and say, well, this is what I've gone through, this is what I've dealt with, this is what I did, maybe you should do the same. That's not the right way to go. And as well, by being told that and rushed, it can lead to moving on, forced, but unresolved. And it gets worse with time. In addition, the comparison can lead to them internalizing it and thinking, you know what, that person speaks, they've got their own problems, I deal with it differently, I've got my own different problem, but you know what, their problem is worse than mine, I'm going to put their feelings first before my own, I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to put myself down and minimize my problem, minimize my struggle because theirs is more important. On a small scale, kind of like if you've got issues or struggles daily and then someone comes up to you and says, there's always people worse off than you, or there's kids in Africa starving and dehydrated. Well, yeah, obvious. But what good does it do in the moment? It kind of strips away and minimizes the struggles of what that person's going through. It might not compare to other people, but in their own little world, their own unique moment, they have the right to struggle, the right to resolve it or to go through the motions, the waves and the emotions to deal with it. If they're told that their struggles aren't valid or aren't important enough because there's another person struggling worse, like it comes, invalidates their problems, invalidates their struggle, and it denies them of recovery or it denies them of natural healing. So this comparison of trauma can be competitive and toxic. And it can lead to minimization or self-minimization and self-dismissal, where the person with the trauma survivor's guilt, hears it from another side, made to feel bad about the situation, so they change their ways, or they stop moping about in their eyes, or the change, but it gets pushed under the rug, and that doesn't do them any good whatsoever. It's like emotional manipulation through another person's trauma lens. It's toxic, so it needs to be avoided. Even like with a partner, to avoid it. To open up, to share, as in, if the other half, the other partner has had trauma or other bad encounters, even on a smaller scale, shouldn't have to suffer in silence, but to open up and share it, but not at the same time when they're dealing with their own struggles. Do it at another time where the person is a bit calmer. Because if you share onto them when they're dealing with their own troubles, it just overflows the system as well. It can be a bit too much. Besides the dismissal, besides the toxic competition, it can be overwhelming. And they themselves may just not have the mental load or capacity to listen or to take it all on board because they're already dealing with a lot of noise within. So it's like time and place for everything when sharing and opening up, so both parties can be involved, acknowledged, but at the right time in a way. So that's worth taking into consideration. The next one, to not minimize past events. If it's a flare-up, if it's a low episode, if it's a night terror, a dream, a nightmare, a vision, a hallucination, it's important for the other partner to listen and to not downplay it. If that vision, if that voice said something or did something, to try and believe in them and to not put them down. To not laugh, to take it serious, but to still be caring in the moment. Because if anything is minimized from the past, it can impact their trauma recovery and journey. It can distort it and mess it up in a way. So it's just about steady, present, and consistent. Toxic positivity. They don't want toxic positivity. Paradoxically speaking, they may be positive themselves or overly positive, happy, bubbly, and chatty, even if they really aren't inside. And they may apply it and double down towards others that may feel negative. That over positive expression isn't toxic in that sense, it's a coping mechanism. But the paradox is, whilst they give it out to other people, likely they don't want it applied to them because they feel they don't deserve it, or it's not really who they are. They want reality and a grounding effect, grounding language, positive, neutral, without it being over the top and bubbly. Just want it to be natural and neutral and calm and stable because, it's something that they've not had before or what they lost at some point. As well, what they probably don't want is their positivity to be taken away as fake or critiqued or questioned, because that's their mask, it's their bubble, it's their shield, it's their protection in different ways, how it characterizes them and makes them who they are. It's about just keeping it steady, controlled. Allow them to do what they do, allow them and welcome their coping mechanisms within reason. But when you give things back, you don't repeat it in a way. Not as a coping mechanism, but to try and relate to them. If you think that they're happy, bubbly, and chatty, you give it back because you think that's how they relate and that's their language, that's what they are close to. If they're not, and it's a mask, masking a mask, it's not going to bring the connection closer. It's going to make it more distant. Whilst they might be fake or pretending to be okay, you being real in a neutral way is a grounding effect on them. It allows them to cope however they cope, but it still confirms to them that their coping mechanisms doesn't push away that partner, but that partner can see through it without demanding change. And they can provide their point of view and put it across in a neutral way, which might help warm them up and guide them into reciprocating when they can, lowering the wall, the defense mechanism, and making it a safer place. So that's another one. Next one. Likely that they don't want the feeling of being watched. That can link to trauma as well, as in questioned and followed about. If they've been followed about in the past, or they had a traumatic event where they were followed or stalked, it can be a scary time. If that happened now, even with a familiar face, it could re-traumatize them or make them feel uncomfortable. as in respect their boundary, respect their personal space physically and emotionally, so they've got time to breathe, time to reflect. And then if they want to, they've got the choice to welcome the other person into their world, bring them in closer, here and there, or permanently, depending on the situation. Just giving that space and that time, which shows respect as well. They feel respected, they feel acknowledged, and all the little underlying tones and the positives what they can get from it too. The next one, they don't want to have to explain everything, especially in the moment. They might only be able to share so much or explain little fragments because of their breath, energy levels, mental capacity and load. They may want to open up and be vulnerable, but they may not have the time or just the energy for it. But they might have a little bit which they can share. It's important for the other half to obviously be punctual, to listen, to consider, to validate, to believe in it, but not to demand more. Even if the person's hungry for learning or just answers, to not demand more, because if you demand more, they might retreat. They might back away. So allowing it just to come out slowly allows them to have their own control of how they tell their story and how they express themselves under their terms, different to how it was in the past, rewriting and moving forwards in life in their own way passively, then sharing it with you too. So it's important. And as well, they may not want to explain everything, because if they do, they may risk that feeling of being too open, oversharing, and then feeling the guilt and shame that comes from it. By explaining it bit by bit over time, it eases the blow, it eases the guilt and any shame. Doing it all in one go might be overwhelming for them, and it might be the fear of overwhelming for the other partner. And they may blame themselves if anything goes wrong because of that. So, slow and steady. Other things, they don't want things to be forgotten. The past is important. Their partner, their ex-partners are important to them, but not in such the way of being emotionally attached and wanting to still be with them beyond whatever. More importantly, their past is important and they don't want it to be forgotten, because what they've gone through, all that suffering for a reason. If it wasn't for a reason, then why did they suffer? So that's why it's important for them to remember the past, to justify why they suffered, but more so to justify how far they've come and where they are now or where they could be in the future. If you forget the past as well, history can repeat itself. By remembering the past or remembering certain things and adapting, it can protect themselves. So for the other half, to remind them to remember in general what they've gone through can be calming for them. The survivor doesn't want to forget the past out of fear of, if they did, history could repeat itself. To some extent, on some occasions with survivor's guilt, a person doesn't want to forget the past or forget a previous partner, because it may trigger deep guilt or shame that they're no longer present, but they themselves, the survivor, are. They don't deserve to move forwards. That's, can be tough. In a situation like that, perspective from, the other partner could be comes across as opinions once again, not demands, not expectations, but suggestions. And, on a very small scale that could be. Depending on the situation, of course. If it was a loving partner from the past and they're no longer present, if closure wasn't reached and it was unexpected, the loss, if you think highly of them and they thought highly of you and they just wanted you to be happy in life regardless, then maybe that's what they would want for you right now, whatever that is, moving on in life, finding someone else. They would probably just want you to be happy and be proud of you too, if they think highly of you. In a more complex situation where there's a bad person in the past, no longer here, you could say, would they want you to be happy to move forwards? Survivor could think, more of a difficult area that, of course, for the other partner. The perspective, slow and steady, an opinion-based perspective that they could offer could be, put yourself in the shoes of that ex-partner. If you were in their position, not to envision it too much, but if you were in their position and what happened, would you expect that bad ex-partner who's present now, would you expect them to stay loyal to you even if you're not present anymore? Or would they just move on like nothing happened? Because if they're willing and able to treat you as badly as they may have done, would they have treated you any better in the afterlife? Or would they have just gone on their way, found someone else, moved on like that, without any care and consideration, without batting an eyelid, and then did it all over again to someone else, and then someone else, you know? It's a hard thing to swallow and consider. I know, I understand. But, if a person, when present, isn't able to show respect and care and love, if the roles were reversed and one was no longer present, would they honour or feel guilty and feel that they've got to stay in the past and hold back out of respect for the other person, or feel like they don't deserve to be happy themselves? They'd probably be very selfish and think, you know what, I'm going to move on just like that without any care and consideration, because if they can do what they did to you when present, then likely they would do exactly what they would do if the roles were reversed. So if they're selfish and they're able to do it, then why should you have to remain loyal after everything that's happened? They don't deserve shit, or they don't deserve that level of loyalty anymore. But it's an opinion and not a demand or a request. It's just an opinion, a different perspective. Not to challenge the thoughts too much, because the survivor's reasoning ability is just as important as well. Even if it does disagreements, the survivor's guilt and thoughts are just as important and valid, right? Now, beside that, other things that the survivor, they don't want their partner to be talked about too much, as in a previous partner. And that could be in terms of negatives or critiques, because at the end of the day, it's the survivor's past, their personal history, their private life from back then. As in, if they're trying to move on, they may not want to be reminded of the past too much. And whilst they are dealing with the past at times when moving forwards and, working through grief or survivor's guilt and trauma, it might be a personal journey which they need to heal and recover from by themselves. And they don't want it to overlap with a new relationship, because it feels like it might muddy the waters. So it's just got to, sometimes things need to be kept separate, but the support, presence can still be there. As in, if you need anything, I'm here, you do what you need to do, and so on. So that's another one. The other one can be that they don't want to lose anyone else. That's a core element of survivor's guilt. They may not want to show it because it may come across to them as needy or obsessive. It's not at all. It's understandable. One, because they care, because they're loyal, because they may be a loving individual. There's nothing wrong with that. But then also it's a form of safety and protection, that if they do get close to anyone or get so close to someone, they don't want to lose them, because if they did, they're kind of in the same place as they were in the past when they didn't have much or no one. Those feelings when in that situation back then, they don't want that to happen again, because it was a difficult time then. It would be a difficult time once again, and maybe worse because it's happening again, and the re-traumatization of the past and dealing with that on top of everything else. So, yeah, a deep feeling what they don't want, but which they probably can't admit clearly because it's hard to express, is they don't want to lose anyone else in life. Sometimes that can reinforce why they hold people at arm's length. So if nothing happens or if things go wrong, they've not got much to lose because they didn't get close to that person to begin with. So it's like, well, it doesn't matter. But the closer they get to someone, the deeper the desire grows, as in wanting to stay close, to stay loyal, that stability, that support, and all the positives that come with it, holding on to it, grasping, clawing, holding on in hopes of it being there forever and not losing it, because of the fear of what it can feel like when it's taken because of the past. Understandable. And then the last one, but they don't want physical, visual, sensory memories, especially of the bad ex, a previous past, a past traumatic event in general. Whilst they need the time to recover, reflect, heal, move on, and get closure, At the same time, or at some point, they may not always want to be reminded of the past, because just like how they want to appear normal and feel normal, besides all the weight that they carry, they also want to be in a normal relationship without the baggage from the past, even if that's just temporary. They don't want the visual memories, the sensory memories, the tattoos, the photos, the clothes, the presents, the gifts, and all that. To some extent, they may not want that in their life because it holds them back physically and reminds them constantly whenever they look at it of previous times. They may not be able to admit or explain that clearly because it's very complex, but it's what they could consider, some people at least. That's how they may feel. Now, beside survivor's guilt and PTSD running side by side, if a person had OCD by itself or in line with those other struggles, it can make everything a lot more difficult because of the looping thoughts, the overthinking, overstimulating the brain and using up more capacity and energy, which drains the body and makes it tired. So there's that. A person with OCD deep down may not want constant reassurance, as in it's being checked, it's being done, because they want the control themselves, as in their routine, their rituals, but also the reassurance as in telling them that, yeah, you've done that several times, you've checked the door 6 times, you've brushed your hair 10 times, you've cleaned your teeth 20 times. That type of reassurance, confirming that they've ticked it off the list, likely they know deep down how many times they've done it because of those obsessions and compulsive thoughts to protect themselves and maintain a level of control. They don't need a spectator mirroring and saying it out loud, because all it does, it reconfirms in their mind that they're problematic or that's how they feel. Too much to deal with, and what they're doing is excessive and they know it is, they can't help it. If an external voice repeats that within them, it's that confirmation again, which doesn't do much good. It just causes discomfort, worry, fear, and just self-negative thoughts and towards the other person, maybe. The other one, they don't want you, well, the one with the OCD, may not want you, the partner, to participate in their rituals. Or maybe at first they don't want you to participate because it's their space. It's taking them time to build up a routine, to form stability, to regain back power, which they may have lost previously. That OCD of checking and thinking and completing tasks to maintain stability, to regulate the nervous system, maybe overdoing it, maybe overthinking, but to find a form of safety and build a net. And then when the rituals are completed to them, it will confirm that everything will be okay in that moment or for that day. And then they repeat it the next day and so on. If another person, like a partner, encroaches upon it and participates, it's like a foreign object entering a world which isn't known or used to it. So when routines are changed, it can disrupt the nervous system and make the person panic or worry, because when changes are made abruptly, unexpectedly, or with force, to them it's a loss of control. So if you're going to be participating in their rituals, there's got to be consent and they need to allow you in. If they don't allow you in, don't jump in, because if you jump in, to them it's a loss of control to their own routine. It can make them panic and feel uneasy. It's about respecting their space and respecting what they've done all this time and not looking down upon them either, right? In some circumstances, the survivor, the one with the OCD, may not want routines to change or change too drastic or change too fast, because if it does, once again, it can be triggering and it feels like a loss of control, and then it might remind them of an intrusive thought from the past where they did lose control or innocence was taken from them without choice or without a chance, and it just puts them back into a dark place and all those feelings come back up and re-emerge, trying to avoid that. So yeah, routines, familiarity, changes made, unfamiliar territory, and when it's unfamiliar, it can scare the person or make them feel uncomfortable. So it's got to be careful. In addition to that, beside changes, they definitely, likely don't want you to take over in their routines, in their methods. If they clean, if they do chores, they may not want you to take over. You might be caring, you might want them to put their feet up and rest and relax, but they themselves are okay keeping busy because it's what helps them and may keep them, in a way, sane. Eventually, they may learn to share responsibilities and activities and spread it evenly, but early days, mid days, not to be rushed. Allow them to do what they do and wait for them to give the thumbs up to allow them into helping them, right? If you take over completely, they lose control of the one thing that they built up in life. And that can be hard, as in when they lose the control, it can be very triggering and more. Now, beside that, other things that they probably don't want to be told to relax or just let go of the routine, told that if they don't do it, it'll be perfectly okay, no harm will come from it. You know? Because deep down, they believe that they've built up a wall to protect themselves from darkness and from the what-ifs. If they're told that none of it exists, it makes them question themselves and their reality. It's kind of insulting, but it can also hurt them in a way. After everything that they've gone through and dealt with, and they found a way to cope, and for that to be questioned or undermined, it might make them feel like, what do they have? It doesn't do much good in a way. It takes away maybe their one coping mechanism in a way. That's why it needs to be careful in words exchanged, right? Another one, they likely don't want to be reminded of the progress, as in progress they've made or progress how it was days before, weeks before, and how it is today. You know, like a daily progress checker or progress tracker, as in, oh, well, you cleaned all this today and you've done less the day after. Even if you're giving progress updates as like a supportive role, they likely already have run it through their mind many times because of the overthinking and whatnot. They don't need it repeating again and again because it just reconfirms in their mind what they've done and what they've not done. And in times where they've not done something or they've not completed a routine or a ritual, it might be unsettling for them. They might feel uncomfortable about it or worried, and it's ruminating in their mind. If the other half then brings it up and says, oh, well, it appears you've not done this today, you've not done that. Even if it's joking or messing and it's not harmful, to them it could feel like, yes, I haven't done it. Thanks for reminding me. Thanks for reminding me that I'm such a failure that I can't even control the one simple thing in life. That's how it can come across inside, and that can lead to worry and panic and disassociation at times. So yeah, there's that. Other things that they don't want to be thought of less. They may feel that what they do is excessive and time-consuming, but they don't want or wish for the other half, partner, to think that way too, or to look down upon them as what they do is silly or over the top or unnecessary. They wish and hope for it to be understood and respected, pretty much. Other ones, they don't want to be challenged or critiqued for what they do, because if that's what they know and how they cope, taking that away from them, they may struggle more. Other things, they don't want a partner that scans for the flaws, whether that be in the OCD or just a relationship. Deep down, they dread and fear that the good that they do, the positives that they show, the love that they give, the support that they can offer, they fear that if the other half looks beyond that and only sees in the flaws, the critiques, the negatives, even if it's just one negative, despite all the positives, it can trigger flashbacks to the past, as in how previous partners picked up on the negatives and skipped all the positives. It doesn't do much good for the other half, you know? As well, they don't want their fears to be invalidated. So if they don't do a ritual, they don't perform a task, and they worry or panic that things are going to go wrong, the day's cursed, the day's not going to go well, they don't want to be invalidated and told, no, it's going to be perfectly fine, you're not going to die, it's all okay. That language doesn't help them. It just makes them feel less heard and less understood. Being able to listen to them and just listen and accept and respect their point of view can go a long way. Other aspects, they don't want to feel a loss of control in general. In a relationship, in their own life, deep down they don't want to lose that control if it's taken so long and hard to build back up earlier. And lastly, They don't want to think or have a heavy head, even if it seems impossible to escape from. Hence why, linking back to the start, they just want to feel like a normal person with a normal life, even if it's a bit silent here and there, and to be with someone, and for it to not be judged or looked down upon too much. And slowly, things progress from there. The reason why all this is important, like I said at the start, whilst things can be given and received and reciprocated, as in what a person deeply wants and deeply needs, that can be done. But if the negatives, the worries, the fears, and the dread isn't covered, there's no safety net. When the positives run out, or when the positives aren't always met, when the negatives come in, the triggers, the landmines, that can be hard. By acknowledging the negatives, what they don't want, what they don't wish for from a partner or a relationship, it just fills the atmosphere with a deeper understanding. And through understanding what not to do, then you know what to do. And vice versa. In the things that you know what they want or desire, you know what to do, and then the opposite, what not to do. Full circle completely. It's things like that which can be done slowly over time, because you're not going to know everything in the moment, but you can consider and learn as you go along with them, providing there is a level of communication both ways in order for changes to be made within reason. Now, with that being said, I know it was a bit of a heavy video or a longer one, but I hope it did help in some way and it made sense. If you want to share your thoughts, additional comments down below, then that'd be appreciated. And I said the full playlist is top right corner of the screen. You can always, rewatch this at another point if it helps. It'll always be public, but I just hope that it helps and things are okay. With that all being said, my name's Warlike Ref. Thanks for watching. Goodbye and good night for now.